There is a strange, almost cruel magic in silence. When someone pulls away, when their presence fades without explanation, a void opens. And into that void rush all the questions, doubts, and fears we thought we had buried. Doing nothing, saying nothing, offering no reassurance. Not chasing seems counterintuitive in a world that teaches us to fight for love, to clarify misunderstandings, to resolve tension with words. But there are moments when silence speaks louder than confrontation, and absence creates a louder echo than presence ever could. The paradox is simple but unsettling. The less you do, the more they begin to feel. The less you show, the more they begin to imagine. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, imagination turns to obsession. This is not manipulation. It is a deeper psychological mechanism at play, one that Marie-Louise von Franz explored through her lifelong study of the unconscious. According to her, people do not fall in love with others as they truly are. They fall in love with what the other awakens in them, the projections cast by their own unconscious. When you are silent, when you refuse to feed their expectations, that projection has nothing to attach to, but grows more powerful in its own ambiguity. You become a screen for their inner world, a mirror that reflects back their unresolved longings, their fears, their fantasies. And so, by doing nothing, you actually become more present in their mind, more vivid in their dreams, more impossible to ignore. The space you leave behind becomes a canvas on which their psyche paints meaning, even where none was given. This is the beginning of obsession, not because you said the right things or performed the right gestures, but because you didn't. Von Franz taught that individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, requires the withdrawal of projection. But before that withdrawal happens, projection must reach its peak. Detachment becomes a catalyst. When you step back, you interrupt the unconscious dance of validation. The other person, deprived of feedback, starts to confront not just the absence of your response, but the presence of their own emotional chaos. They begin to feel not only your silence, but everything within themselves that your silence unsettles. This is the hidden power of doing nothing. It doesn't push them away. It draws them in, deeper than attention ever could. Because now, they're not reacting to you. They're reacting to their own psyche. And in that moment, you become not just someone they know, but someone they cannot stop thinking about. Obsession does not begin with logic. It does not arise from what is said or done. It starts in the hidden chambers of the unconscious, where reason has no jurisdiction and memory merges with fantasy. You see someone, perhaps even in passing, and something stirs in it in the heart, but in the depths of the psyche. This stirring has nothing to do with who they are. It is not about their voice or their gestures or even their presence. It is about the image your unconscious has already constructed long before they entered the room. Marie-Louise von Franz, in her work on the unconscious, revealed a truth that explains this haunting magnetism. Each person carries within them an internal figure, the anima in men, the animus in women. These are not mere psychological traits, but deep symbolic archetypes, shaped by experience, culture, and the unspoken stories passed through generations. They are images of the other that live inside us, long before we ever meet someone who matches their shape. When someone in the outer world reflects this inner figure, the projection ignites. You don't just feel drawn, you feel possessed. This is where obsession is born. Not with the person in front of you, but with the image they awaken. The mind begins to spin narratives, assign meaning to glances, invent intentions where there are none. The person becomes a character in your inner story, and the more distant or unavailable they are, the more perfect they seem, because the less you truly know them, the more space your projection has to grow. Von Franz warned that this projection can be so powerful, it overrides reality. You no longer see them. You see yourself cloaked in their outline. And when they step outside that role, when their humanity starts to show, when they speak or act in ways that don't fit the myth, obsession often deepens, not weakens. The psyche clings to the illusion, refusing to relinquish the dream. This is why some of the strongest fixations arise in silence, in unrequited longing, in the space where nothing is clear. The unconscious does not need confirmation to spin its tale, needs only the echo of possibility, and that echo becomes louder in the absence of contact. To be obsessed is to be under a spell, but it is not cast by the other. It is cast by the part of you that longs to be completed, to find in another the pieces you haven't yet claimed within yourself. And in this search, the unconscious projects its symbols, its hunger, its hopes until the other becomes not who they are. but who you need them to be. Being ignored doesn't just hurt, it awakens something ancient inside. It's not the silence itself that causes suffering, but what that silence reflects back to us. When someone pulls away without explanation, when they withhold the comfort of words or the reassurance of attention, it doesn't simply create distance, it creates a mirror. And in that mirror, we don't see them. We see ourselves. Marie-Louise von Franz spoke often of the way we project our unconscious contents onto others, especially in moments of emotional intensity. Love, in her view, is rarely about the other person. More often, it is about what they represent, what they activate within us. When someone we care about turns away, the emotional charge it triggers is almost never new. It is the echo of earlier wounds, rejections we endured without understanding, longings we carried silently through childhood, fears we never fully named. The present moment cracks open the past. Suddenly, we are not just being ignored by someone now, we are being abandoned again by someone then. A parent who withheld affection, a first love who disappeared without warning, a friend who left without saying goodbye. The other person becomes a stand-in for everyone who ever made us feel invisible, unworthy, or not enough. And the obsession begins not just with wanting them back, but with needing them to undo the damage they never caused. But they can't, because they are not really the source of the wound. They are the mirror in which it becomes visible. Von Franz saw these moments not as curses, but as opportunities. When we fall in love, fall into fixation, we are falling into an encounter with ourselves. The unconscious uses the image of the other to bring to the surface what we have long buried. Their distance activates our hunger. Their silence replays the moments we were never heard. And yet, the more we chase, the more the reflection slips away. We confuse healing with possession. We imagine that if we can just get them to return, to speak, to validate us, then the wound will close. But the mirror doesn't work that way. It doesn't heal by reflecting what we want, it heals by showing us what is. To see ourselves clearly through the mirror of another's silence is to begin the real work. Not of changing them, but of meeting the part of us that hurts when they disappear. Because what we fall in love with, as von Franz said, is not the person. We fall in love with our own soul, made visible through their presence. And when they vanish, the soul they mirrored still remains, waiting to be seen without projection, without distortion, waiting to be claimed. There is a hidden current beneath every relationship, ancient and untouched by words. When one person withdraws, when their energy, their presence, their affection is suddenly gone, it doesn't simply cause confusion. It awakens something deeper. The response it evokes is not just emotional, it is archetypal. It is the stirring of a pattern, older than thought, older than memory, something embedded in the psyche of every human being. The instinct to pursue what vanishes. Marie-Louise von Franz understood this dance well. In her exploration of the unconscious, she uncovered how archetypes move through us, shaping our experience of love and loss, even when we believe we are acting freely. One of the most haunting of these figures is the pure Etonist, the eternal youth. He lives in fantasy, avoids limits, and craves transcendence. But most of all, he fears abandonment. And when someone pulls away, it is this fear that comes alive. The puer, the puella, its feminine counterpart, lives in the part of us that cannot tolerate absence. The moment love is withheld, this figure rushes to the surface, not to face reality, but to chase the ideal. Suddenly, the one who withdraws becomes everything. They become the dream, the salvation, the only one who can quiet the ache. And so, obsession is born not out of love, but out of myth. The myth of being rescued, of being chosen, of being reunited with the one who will finally make the longing stop. But this pursuit is not rational, it is ritualistic. It is Persephone descending into the underworld. It is Orpheus turning back too soon. It is the echo of 1,000 stories where the beloved disappears and the hero must follow. We do not chase because they are perfect. We chase because something inside us believes they complete a story written long before we met them. And yet, in the act of doing nothing, in silence, in space, in absence, this myth is activated. Withdrawal becomes the spark. The person who steps back unknowingly assumes the role of the sacred, the elusive, the unreachable, and in their stillness, they gain power, not because they wield it, but because the unconscious grants it to them. They are no longer a person, they are a symbol. Von Franz taught that these archetypes are not meant to be lived unconsciously. They are meant to be recognized, integrated, and ultimately transcended. But when we are caught in their grip, We believe the chase is about them. We believe that if they just return, everything will be whole again. But the truth is, their absence has only awakened a longing that was always there, not for them, but for something greater, for meaning, for wholeness, for the part of ourselves we lost somewhere long ago. And it is through that ache, through the myth the psyche plays out, that we are invited to awaken. When you withdraw your attention, something strange begins to happen, not just on the surface, but in the deeper currents that move beneath all human connection. You step back, you say nothing, you stop reaching out, and yet, rather than fading from their mind, you become more present, louder, heavier. The air around your absence thickens. It is not your presence that holds them now, but the space you've left behind. Marie-Louise von Franz, drawing from Jung's work on the psyche, spoke often of libido not in the narrow, sexual sense, but as the vital psychic energy that flows through all human experience. This energy is always seeking form, always seeking expression, and when a source of attention disappears, the energy doesn't disappear with it. It has to go somewhere. In the absence of interaction, it turns inward, gathering momentum in the mind of the one left behind. This is how fantasy is born. This is how longing intensifies. The one who has stepped back is no longer tethered to the mundane. They no longer say things that ground them in reality. Their silence becomes a canvas, and the psyche, desperate for resolution, begins to paint. Every imagined scenario, every unresolved question, every memory infused with feeling, these are the ways libido redirects itself. The energy once exchanged in dialogue now cycles internally, looping, feeding on itself, until the thought of you becomes impossible to shake. This is not manipulation. It is physics of the psyche. What you withhold becomes rare. What is rare becomes charged. And what is charged becomes significant. Von Franz taught that the unconscious seeks symbols, and when no new input is offered, the mind elevates the last symbol it had. In the quiet of your withdrawal, the other begins to assign meaning. They feel the lack of your energy, and their own surges forward to fill the void. They wonder what they did. They remember every moment in a different light. They reframe the story, not because you told them to, but because the psyche cannot leave a vacuum unfilled. It is in this vacuum that obsession is born, not out of need, but out of energy displaced. The longing they feel is not entirely for you, it is the force of their own libido, turned inward, circling around the image of you because it has nowhere else to go. And so, by doing nothing, you become everything, not because you've changed, but because you've allowed the energy to shift. You have stopped feeding the dynamic, and in doing so, you have triggered a flood of psychic movement. You've become the center of a storm you no longer need to enter. The chase is older than language. It lives in myths, in dreams, in the quiet ache that pulses when something or someone slips just out of reach. The moment you step back, something timeless begins to unfold. Not a modern misunderstanding or a game of strategy, but a pattern the psyche has rehearsed for centuries. Suddenly, it's not just about two people anymore. It becomes a story, a myth. Persephone is taken into the underworld, and the earth mourns. Psyche is separated from Eros, and must complete impossible tasks to win back his love. Narcissus longs so deeply for an image he cannot reach, he loses himself entirely. These are not just stories, they are psychological maps. Marie-Louise von Franz knew this well. In her work with fairy tales and ancient narratives, she uncovered how myths mirror inner experiences, especially around love, distance, and desire. When one person withdraws, the other is initiated, not gently, but violently into longing, uncertainty, and self-discovery. The psyche doesn't passively accept absence, it rebels, it reaches, it yearns. And in that yearning, something stirs. A transformation begins. This is the forgotten gift of the chase. Not its ending, but its unraveling. The way it reveals what we cling to, what we fear, and what we are still trying to find in another. Stepping back is not the end of connection, it is the descent. The first step into the underworld, into the dark forest, into the unconscious. It is the moment when the ordinary becomes charged with symbolic meaning. Von Franz often said that fairy tales didn't describe love as safe or easy. They described it as a trial, a test, a mirror held to the soul. And it is through pursuit, through longing and loss that the hero is changed. In every story, the one who chases is chasing more than a person. They are chasing themselves, the part of them that was projected outward, dressed in the image of the beloved, now lost, now radiant, now unreachable. The pain of the chase is real, but it is also sacred. It breaks open the ego and exposes what was hidden, the desire not just to love another, but to feel whole. This is why absence can feel so unbearable. It's not just about missing someone, it's about confronting the myth within us. And the one who steps back, knowingly or not, becomes the archetype, the one who disappears, the one who must be sought, the one who holds the key to transformation. The myth of the chase does not promise reunion, it promises change. And the one who survives the journey, the one who can endure not knowing, who can face the silence without collapsing, is the one who emerges, not with someone else, but with a deeper knowledge of their own soul. There comes a moment in every fixation when the image begins to crack. At first, the obsession feels endless, vivid, alive, intoxicating. The person becomes a symbol, a savior, a mirror for everything unclaimed inside. But the psyche cannot maintain a projection forever. Marie-Louise von Franz called this moment the collapse, when the energy that once surged outward loses its grip and begins to fold back in. What once felt like love now trembles under the weight of its own illusion. Projection collapse is not sudden, it's a quiet unraveling. The beloved, once perfect, starts behaving like a person. They contradict the fantasy, they fail to meet the role unconsciously assigned to them, or they remain absent for too long, and the fantasy begins to starve. The obsessive current grows restless, disoriented. The image no longer soothes, it provokes. What once filled you with longing now exposes the rawness it was hiding. Von Franz saw this moment not as a failure of love, but as an initiation into something more honest. The psyche, exhausted from projecting its contents onto someone else, begins to retrieve what was lost. The obsession collapses, and with it, the idealized version of the other. You stop seeing them as the answer. You start seeing them as a mirror portal to the deeper work. This collapse often feels like crisis. There is grief, confusion, even anger, not just toward the other, but toward the self for having believed, for having needed, for having constructed a reality so far from truth. But this is where transformation begins. The energy that once chased outward starts turning inward. The longing no longer seeks a response from them. It starts asking questions you never dared voice. Who am I without this fixation? What part of me did I give away in their image? The obsessive spell breaks, not because you will it to, but because the psyche can no longer sustain the fiction. And in that break, there is a choice. To mourn the fantasy and build something real, or to chase another figure, another face, another vessel for projection. True integration happens when you don't rush to replace what was lost, when you sit with the ache, the emptiness, the truth that no one outside you can complete what was never whole to begin with. This is the moment, von Franz pointed to, the place where love, stripped of illusion, might finally become something sacred. Not a pursuit of the other, but a return to the self. There is a stage in every inner transformation where everything seems to go dark. No answers come, no relief arrives. The world feels stripped of meaning, and nothing you do seems to change it. Jung called this the Negrodotha blackening, the first stage of alchemy, where the old identity begins to dissolve. And Marie-Louise von Franz took this further, showing how this darkness isn't a failure of growth, but the beginning of it. It is here, in the absence of certainty, of connection, of the other, that something deeper begins to take form. When you do nothing, when you refuse to beg, to chase, to fill the silence, you enter this alchemical night. You surrender to what feels like emptiness. But this emptiness is not passive. It is a crucible, a container, where all the illusions projected outward begin to burn away. You think you're losing them, but what you're really losing is the story you wrapped around them. The one that said they would complete you. The one that made them responsible for your light. Obsession, in this space, becomes heat. Not outward, but inward. It churns, it aches, it draws out the shadow parts, the hunger to be seen, the fear of abandonment, the need to be chosen. The absence of the other exposes the presence of your own unfinished self. And if you resist the urge to escape it, if you stay in the heat without numbing or replacing it, something begins to happen. Von Franz believed the symbols and fairy tales in alchemy were not just metaphors, but psychological truths. The fire that burns in the Nigredo purifies. It separates the false from the essential. And this is what absence does. It strips away the noise, the fantasy, the defense. What remains is raw, but real. You are not transformed by their return. You are transformed by their disappearance, by what it makes you confront in yourself, by what it forces you to carry alone. The stillness of doing nothing is not weakness. It is containment. It is discipline. It is the sacred pause where unconscious material rises to the surface, where you meet the parts of you that had always been there, but never had space to speak. And slowly, something shifts. Not dramatically, not all at once, but undeniably. The ache begins to clarify. The pain begins to instruct. You begin to see that the obsession wasn't only about them, it was a map leading you inward. And in that realization, you start to rise. Not because they came back, but because you did. There is a quiet power in not interfering, in stepping back, in choosing not to merge, not to explain, not to rescue. It may feel like absence, like loss, like failure, but beneath that stillness is something vital. The space you create by doing nothing is not emptiness. It is protection. A boundary drawn not in defiance, but in devotion to something deeper. Your own becoming. Marie-Louise von Franz often warned that the greatest threat to individuation, the sacred process of becoming who you truly are, is emotional fusion. When you dissolve into another, when your identity starts to orbit around their needs, their reactions, their silence, you forget the shape of your own soul. Love, when confused with merging, becomes a detour. What feels like intimacy can become escape from yourself, from your wounds, from your work. To detach is not to stop caring. It is to care differently. It is to choose depth over drama, growth over gratification. By not reacting, not chasing, not collapsing into the obsessive loop, you keep the energy where it belongs, inside. This is the essence of individuation, not building a self that is independent from love, but a self that is not dependent on it for identity. When someone begins to obsess over you, to crave the contact you withhold, something is revealed, not just about them, but about you. You are no longer the one spinning in pursuit. You are still, anchored, and in that stillness, your true shape begins to emerge. You see what parts of you were distorted by the need to be chosen, and what strength rises when that need is burned away. Von Franz believed that real growth doesn't happen through comfort, it happens through tension. The tension of not knowing, of letting others project onto you, long for you, chase after the reflection they believe you are. And instead of feeding that image, you hold your ground. You let their projection unfold while you stay in contact with your own process. This isn't detachment out of superiority. It's detachment out of reverence for the work your soul must do alone. You stop trying to manage how they see you. You stop trying to rescue them from their own longing. And in doing so, you reclaim the energy you once gave away in pieces. Individuation isn't isolation. It's clarity. And sometimes the clearest step is the one where you step back not as punishment, but as preservation. Not to manipulate, but to mature. Because you understand now, what they feel is their path. What you feel is yours. And by not entangling the two, you allow both stories to unfold in truth. There comes a moment when the energy shifts, not with noise, not with a declaration, but with something quieter, deeper. The chase falters, the questions slow. The fixation begins to lose its fever. But rather than dissolving into indifference, something unexpected takes its place. Reverence. Where there was once frantic, consuming, desperate, there is now a still regard, not for the illusion of who you were, but for what you've become. You are no longer the object of their need, but the symbol of something they cannot quite explain. Mystery, depth, meaning. Not because you tried to create it, but because you stopped trying altogether. Marie-Louise von Franz understood this transition well. She saw how the psyche, when starved of easy resolution, elevates the unknown. What was once chaste becomes sacred. Not because it is possessed, but because it remains just out of reach. And in that distance, you become something more than a person. You become a figure in their inner world, a presence they return to in thought, in dream, in silence, not to control, but to witness. This is not a trick. It is not a strategy. It is the natural evolution of energy when you cease to feed it. By refusing to perform, to prove, to persuade, you allow the other to sit with the weight of their own experience. And what remains is not confusion, it is awe. True attraction does not emerge from effort. It is born from alignment. When you no longer need to be seen a certain way, when your value is no longer tied to how closely you meet their desire, you become something else entirely. Unreachable, not because you are cold, but because you are whole. and wholeness is magnetic in a way no performance can ever match. The person who once obsessed may never fully understand why your absence carved such a space inside them, but they will feel it, and in that feeling, something shifts. You stop being the one they want to own, and become the one they respect. Admiration replaces longing, stillness replaces pursuit, and you no longer live at the mercy of their gaze. You no longer shrink or swell in response to their attention. You simply are, rooted in your own rhythm, committed to your own becoming. This is the final paradox. The less you seek to be chosen, the more unforgettable you become. Not because of what you offer, but because of what you embody. A presence that does not beg, that does not chase, that does not fracture itself to be loved. And in that quiet, unshakable presence, love no longer becomes a chase. It becomes a return.